Hello and welcome to Drip Feed, water talk straight from the source. Hi, I'm Claire, and today we're going to talk about something that Scotland probably doesn't consider a big issue for them: saving water. And today I'm joined by Brian McCarthy from Scottish Water, who is the Scottish Water's Water Resource and Demand Manager.
Hi, Claire.
Easy for me to say. Welcome. And we're also joined by Laura Anderson, who is also known as Less Waste Laura. She's an award-winning climate activist, environmental scientist, and a general all-round expert on behaviour change in this area.
Hello, lovely to be on.
Let's talk about water saving. It's not front of mind in people in Scotland's lives, right?
I think that's correct, because really there's two factors that I think play into this. The first is Scotland's wet. So we've got lots of water, we've got lots of rivers and lochs, we've got watery environments, and it does rain a lot. So I think people think that Scotland has a lot of abundant clean water. And we do, we have loads of water environments. And I think people really value those, feel connected to water in so many different ways. But I think that leads us to thinking that surely we've just got a sort of endless supply of clean water. And as soon as it rains, surely that means that that's straight into the water system and good to use. But I would also say that there's this second thing of we have a brilliant water system, our water infrastructure. So when you go to the tap, you turn it on and you have gushing out lovely, clean, fresh tap water that, the joke is that it is the best in the world, right? People are so proud of it. But really, there's never a time that you go to the tap and don't have water. So I think the fact that there's a perception of Scotland being super wet and having loads of water, and the fact that we do have a great water infrastructure means that just day to day, I think people maybe just don't think about it. They don't think about how much they're using. Maybe don't even, if you were to hazard a guess, maybe wouldn't even be able to put a number on how many litres of water they're using a day.
Sure. So Brian, you work at the vanguard or the forefront of the water system in Scotland. What's the reality?
Well, I suppose I think I like to understand how people are using water, and certainly how much water they're using. And I know about our water resources and what we've got available. So I often say to people, we have access to, just around 400 different raw water sources. We don't have access to the 30,000 lochs and reservoirs. We aren't able to take water from every puddle that you see as you're driving along the road. So for me, it's about understanding that from Scottish Water's perspective, we don't have access to everything, and we make best use of what we are licensed to take out of the environment. So everything we can do to consider that, to value that, and to consider it as a precious natural resource, a really important thing for me, just to get that message across. And we've talked many a time about the person linking with the environment when they turn on their tap. So they never look behind the wall at the environment that sits behind that, a huge, great big water environment and a system of pipes and treatment works and everything that sits behind that wall. I suppose as things have become easier, life becomes easier and more here and now, you literally just go and turn the tap on. You don't think about it.
Yeah, I left the house this morning. I'd showered, I'd cleaned my teeth, had a cup of tea, all that sort of stuff. So I used a lot of water all before 8 o'clock in the morning. How much does the average person use, Brian?
So we calculate it we don't have meters in Scotland, domestic meters that is. So we have to calculate the volume, and we do that through a representative sample of homes throughout the country. And we reckon that every customer is using, on average, 180, just less than 180 litres per day.
Wow, that's a lot.
That is a lot.
I've got a great big pyramid of bottles. Don't have it with me today. I have pictures of me stretching up to that final bottle.
Sure.
But when you've got 360 half-litre bottles, it's a huge amount.
I would say as well, a lot of that's hidden, right? Because I guess, if you're imagining those 180 1-litre bottles or, divide it up however you want, people might think there's no way that I use that much water, because you might think about it in terms of glasses of water. So how many glasses of water might you have a day? You might think, how many cups of tea do I have a day? And so there's, I guess, water that we physically are consuming, we're cooking with, which is actually maybe on the smaller end of that part of the 180 litres. But there's, I guess, the hidden water. So there's the water that we might use in a dishwasher or a washing machine. There's the water that, I mean, it's not hidden because we're having a shower, but you're not collecting all of that water. You're not maybe seeing it right in front of you. And there's even water, things like in your garden or even filling up a dog bowl, right? There's all these little bits of water that are throughout our day that add up. And of course, we do have some wasteful habits sometimes. So potentially we're also running water when we maybe don't need to, which all contributes to that 180 litres.
The one thing that you picked up on there with people not realising, so there was a really small survey done in the UK a couple of years ago, and it said that around about 42% of people think they use less than 20 litres a day.
Yeah.
That's because they're thinking about that glass of water. And when you speak to customers and you remind them that, did you flush the toilet? Did you brush your teeth? Did you have a shower? They then start clicking and adding it all up.
Me and some of my colleagues, we actually did some research at the Edinburgh Fringe last year. And one of the questions we asked people was, how many litres of water, do you think you use a day? Not a single person got even close to the 180.
So the average person spends about 7 minutes in a shower. That's quite a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's an average. It varies if you've got short hair, long hair, and a lot of women maybe don't wash their hair every day. But what things, obviously we could take a shorter shower. What other things could we be asking people to do just to make those tiny little changes, Laura?
There's loads of things. And actually, I think, first of all, it's just trying to be aware of water. So maybe even just for a day, just try and think a bit about how many times am I going to the tap? What am I using water for? And then that'll help bring some things to light. But there's loads of stuff. I mean, the basics that we probably all had drilled into us at school is don't let the tap run when you're brushing your teeth. Yep. But that's also, if you're waiting for, if you're shaving or if you're doing the dishes, try and use a basin, always try and think, don't just let water be running constantly. Because that's something, even, if you're waiting for the shower to heat up, I think be conscious about some of the appliances that you use. So especially if you've got a dishwasher or a washing machine, try not half fill them, try not run them all the time. Put them on the eco modes if you can, try and make sure that they're full and they're ready to go. I think that's important. People always ask me, do you rinse your dishes before you put them in the dishwasher? I feel that's a step you can just skip. Right now, dishwashers are meant so that we can have a bit of food on it. Scrape your food into the food waste bin if there's any bits, but they don't need to be pristine and clean.
No.
The dog's water bowl, when it needs refreshed, chuck it into a plant, even tiny things. But I think there's also some bigger things that you can potentially do. And certainly if you own your home, you can maybe make some different changes. So you can get little, things to put on your tap to make them a bit more water saving. If you're a keen gardener, you can get a big water butt. You can think about, conserving water in your garden. And obviously the big one is the leaky toilets and the leaky taps.
Very much.
I think that's a huge one that we can be doing to save water.
So they reckon there's about 10% of toilets are leaking at any one time in the whole of UK.
Oh my goodness.
I was going to ask you, Brian, what uses the most water in our homes on a day-to-day basis?
So we use the majority of the water. The biggest chunks be bathroom, and then you're looking at toilet flushing and showering. Right. Showering or bathing, that's your biggest loads. If you've got a garden and you get into really warm weather and people believe that the grass needs some water to keep it alive, which it doesn't, it'll bounce back. You'll use loads. People
are always saying, should I have a shower or should I have a bath? What is the answer in terms of water saving?
Right. So Claire said average showers at 7 minutes. My number was 8, but it's 10 litres on average. So there's 80 litres, 70, 80 litres straight away. By the time you put your own self in a bath, you'll probably find you're using about 80 to 100 litres in a bath. So average shower is the same as a bath. I hear horrific stories of half an hour showers, 2 hour showers. That's 20 bathfuls. Yeah. That's ridiculous. But I do hear of people who sit in the bath and they constantly top it up with hot water. it doesn't go down the overflow. No, of course it does. If you're constantly topping it up.
Brian, tell us why we don't have meters in Scotland.
So when we were formed, we became East of Scotland Water, West of Scotland Water, North of Scotland Water, then we became Scottish Water. And all through that, we kept the charges and the collection of charges aligned to the council tax. We were all in the public sector, Scottish Water working with the local authorities to do the billing and to do the collection. It made sense. It was a valuable way to do it.
But to Laura's point, there's no motivation if your water is seen by many as essentially free, right?
Yeah.
But if you had a meter, you would have more motivation than. So why don't we have meters?
So we're doing a project in Dundee, and we're not using the word meter. We're using the term monitor because we're not tying it to billing, and we're trying to see if providing customers with more information about their water use could lead to a significant and sustainable reduction in water use as a whole. Now we're doing that in an area of Dundee which is representative of the whole country. I think we're now 6 months in of all the monitors in the ground. We're getting some really good information, but there are examples where a customer has done something, fixed something, and their water use has gone from maybe 1,000 litres a day, with the majority being continuous flow, and then in 2 steps, they've gone down to almost 150, 200 litres a day.
That's quite heartening to hear.
I reckon that's 2 toilets that they've fixed.
Yeah, and this feels like that, that kind of positive nudge theory. Quite often now if you go to a hotel, there's the little sign next to the towels that says, most other customers, most other guests don't use one towel every single time they have a shower.
I think one of the other things to pick up on, so half of the water that you use is heated. And if customers can pick up on that trigger or that hook of, hang on, I could reduce my energy bill by using less hot water. How can I do that? And coming back to the washing machine and how you could save or how you could use less water. How often, and I'm going to blame the teenagers here because I think we've all been teenagers and we probably all did it. You wear something once, a pair of jeans, and you chuck it in the wash basket. Those jeans will manage another wash, and that would make a huge difference. The washing machine's 50 litres a time. So that would make a big difference.
Yeah. We did a survey a long while back, a year or so back, and we asked people how comfortable they would be in their own homes about maybe not flushing every time. This is an Australian idea. If it's yellow, let it mellow. And if it's brown, flush it down. So the point being that you would save a lot of water per flush if you're working from home on your own. You're the only one in the house. Where do you stand on that?
I'm happy to let it mellow if it's yellow, absolutely. I mean, I do work a lot from home and quite often it is just me or just me and my husband. So yep, I'm more than happy to just let it sit. I think that's not a problem. I do sort of sometimes have to say to my husband, now just remember we've got people coming over tonight, so I'll check the toilet before people come in, just to make sure. But I think that's absolutely fine.
So it's a real talker. The nation is divided. About 48% said, yes, I'm a yellow mellower, and 52 were just like, yeah, that's icky. Really? Totally. Brian, where do you stand?
Well, I'm a let it mellow. I always think of it in terms of volume. That's where I come from. So if every house, 2.6 million houses, flushed the toilet once less each day, there's 15 million litres on average.
Wow, saved.
So that's 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools, if you can picture that. So that's a fair amount.
So talking of how habits have changed, and we're now visiting or staying at home, staycations have gone crazy. We're much more likely to maybe jump in a camper van or, as you said, and take off around the country. What sort of impact do you think that's having on water supplies, Laura?
People do move around, and of course, the water usage that they have will move around with them. Also, just in the better weather, or we've had a lot of heat waves this year. So again, people's habits are changing. And that goes both ways as well, because we also have international visitors. There's lots of things that have been happening. We've had the Commonwealth Games that's been here. We've got things like the Edinburgh Fringe that's every year, so we also have lots of visitors that come over and use our water, which I'm guessing is something that is still a strain, even if it maybe balances out with the incoming and outgoing.
I would think of the West Coast, Skye and Oban and Arran and places like that. Beautiful spots, and we want to do or want to play our part in promoting those parts of Scotland for tourism. They're fantastic, but yeah, if people can think of the water they're using when they're out of their normal spaces, they might actually use less. But in general, we would see an influx and then an increase in demand. And when the weather gets better, you then double that up with the local population using more as well. Yeah, it can become a strain.
We have had recent heat waves followed by extraordinarily powerful thunderstorms and rainfall. And last year was pretty warm as well. What's happening? Because it's not the same picture across the whole country, is it, Brian?
It's certainly not. And it's certainly very different from 20, 30 years ago. So I would put it down to climate change or just our climate is changing. Let's put it that way. So the seasons have moved a little bit. And when we see rainfall, it's often very heavy, far shorter big bursts of rainfall. They reckon that rainfall is actually going to increase as climate changes, but the majority of it's going to fall in the winter. And we're going to see these longer, drier periods through the summer with less water when we actually need it most.
How should we be reacting to that, saving water but also staying cool?
Yeah, and it's a really important one, because obviously while we talk about water being important to conserve and save and not be wasteful with it, there's also the really vital water that we absolutely should be using. So keeping yourself cool and drinking water, that's super important. And I know that for me, through all these heat waves, I've been heavily pregnant, so I feel like I'm sweating and boiling more than normal. But the great thing is that, we've just got this delicious, fresh, clean tap water that we want people to use in abundance for drinking. And out and about, we've got these top-up taps. So it's great that you can even literally, as you go throughout the day in the heat, be constantly refreshing yourself.
And don't worry about drinking that. We're using 2 litres. An average person, 8 glasses a day is 2 litres of water. That's tiny in comparison to everything else.
Yeah, so we've got, I think, 130 plus top-up taps around the country. So people can top up when they're out and about. And when you have your baby, you'll be in good hands. 89% of people say that Scottish water is world class.
What about the other 11?
Well, we're working on them.
But I think it's true. I obviously think it's great. And when I travel around the world, I very much, you do have that thing of, it's not quite as good as the water back home. But also, so many people that come and visit or live here from elsewhere, that is what they talk about. And when me and my colleagues were doing this research and we were asking people, what comes to mind when you think of water, loads of people unprompted said, it tastes amazing, it's so fresh, it's world class. And so I think it's just amazing that we also have it in the middle of, city centres or by the beach. And I know that some of them are great, because even some of my running routes, because I live down in South Ayrshire and we've got some all along the coast. So it's also great that you can know that you can go for a big long run and know that you're not going to get caught short and you don't need to run with a big heavy water bottle.
And that's reducing plastic all the time, because you're not having to buy water on the go, right? Yeah. Just to wrap up, we've got one tip. You're in the garden this weekend. You're thinking about washing your car. How should people go about that, Brian?
So let's use a bucket and sponge for the car. You don't necessarily have to get the hose out. Don't worry about the grass. That'll bounce back in the first sight of rain. So let's not waste 1,000 litres for every hour of this thing just going like this. Grass will come back. All the garden people tell you grass will come back. You don't need to water your grass. And if you've got a water butt, use a watering can and point that straight at the flowers, but not in the heat of the day. Do it at night so it's not going to evaporate off.
What's your thoughts on paddling pools?
Don't worry about it. Don't buy the 50,000 litre one.
Oh, that was my dream.
Just put a cover over it. and make sure you don't waste the water. And if you do, just chuck it on the grass.
I know. Well, I will say, I'll out myself. So I have a paddling pool, and I bought it actually during Storm Babette when my tenement roof was leaking and I ran out of pots and pans to catch drips. But anyway, so paddling pools can be useful in many, many circumstances. But I actually did get my paddling pool out in that kind of biggest heat wave that we had in the summer. But it's quite small and I only filled it a little bit, mostly because my ankles swole up being so pregnant. But it was actually good because we had it out in the garden for the whole week. We did keep it covered. The dog was in and out of it. You know, we kept it. We didn't keep replenishing it all the time. And then I got my husband to go out with the bucket and the watering can and use it, you know, all over the garden to make sure that we weren't wasting it. And so I think partly it was just being mindful that after the heat wave was over, we didn't just kind of tip it all down the drain or chuck it away, or we weren't constantly filling up. So I think that's it. But, you know, I think with every season of life, you also come into different things. So I'm quite excited to see how I can also think about saving all sorts of waste when the baby comes, and water will, you know, be a huge part of that, because I know that my laundry is probably going to be more than I've ever done.
Oh my goodness, of course.
You know, trying to just think, you know, make sure it's full, you know, make sure I'm doing it economically as well, you know, not just having it running all the time. But even just things like, you know, we do have a bath in our house, but I don't need to fill up a huge bath for a tiny little baby. You know, I can use a little baby bath or good old kitchen sink, you know, all these little things that can just be really helpful and just be really mindful of.
If you ask somebody who had no awareness at all of water use right now, never crossed their mind, what would you say?
People in Scotland, very strange relationship with water. And I think we do think about water a lot, but in the environment where it's best seen, or where it's at, the one thing we don't do is we don't connect when we turn the tap on. That walk that I had, or that run that I had, I really enjoy it because it's round a body of water or it's down the river bank. But they then come home and have a shower and they don't connect the two. If they were to do that, I think they would value it that little bit more, and they would waste less. I think you can talk about using less and all that kind of stuff. If you just flip it and just say waste that little bit less than you maybe would before, then that'll make a big difference.
Well, I'm taking from this that we need to prove that water has real value, and that'll be the first step on the journey. And it's not about big changes. Even if you don't have a garden and a water butt or whatever, there are small things that you can do around the house or at work, or, you know, nagging your children or whatever that may be. And that if we all do a little, it'll all add up and make a difference for Scotland, because water is always worth saving.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on Drip Feed. Like and subscribe for more.